The 2014 Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series, brought to you by Georgia Public Broadcasting. The Democratic race for the United States Senate.
Good evening. I'm Russ Spencer, journalist and anchor for Fox 5 News in Atlanta. And we'd like to welcome you and our live studio audience to the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series, originating from Georgia Public Broadcasting Studios right here in Atlanta. This is the debate between the Democratic candidates in Georgia's U.S. Senate race. Now let's meet those candidates. They are, in alphabetical order, Steen Miles, a former member of the Georgia State Senate and a former newscaster; Michelle Nunn, a former CEO and president of the Points of Light Foundation; Branko Radlovački is an Atlanta board-certified psychiatrist. He is best known as Dr. Rad for obvious reasons, and I will refer to him that way for the rest of the evening. And Todd Robinson is a retired Army veteran. And now let's meet our panel of journalists. Tom Baxter is a journalist with the Support Report. Gene Bonner is the state capitol reporter for Georgia Public Broadcasting. And Rose Scott is an award-winning journalist and producer for WABE 90.1 FM. Now, tonight's debate will consist of 3 rounds, and for more information on the rules for each round, please visit the Atlanta Press Club website at atlantapressclub.org. Now let's get started. In the first round, each candidate will be asked one question by one of our panelists. The candidates have 60 seconds to answer the question. Rose Scott, you get the first question for Steen Miles.
Thank you, Russ. Candidate Miles, right now in Washington, there's a little bit of a challenge in the parties working across the aisle with each other. How would you say your experience as a Georgia State Senator would be helpful in trying to bridge the challenges that they're having right now?
Thank you for that question. A proven record in the Georgia State Senate of being able to work across the aisles. There are a number of pieces of legislation that were sponsored by Republicans on which I am an early signer. More specifically, the Georgia anti-smoking law was sponsored by a Republican doctor, and I was asked to sign on early. My district, 43rd District, was predominantly Republican and white in Rockdale County, predominantly African American and Democrat in DeKalb County. We were able to bridge that divide, and we're extremely proud of our record of serving both of those constituencies. It's very important that someone goes to Washington who has a proven track record of being able to bridge the racial, the political, and the economic divide. We have that experience from the Georgia Senate. We take that experience to Washington.
Ms. Miles, thank you very much. Tom Baxter, you now have a question for Michelle Nunn.
Ms. Nunn, as some have put it, you've walked a fine line with regard to issues surrounding the Affordable Care Act. You've called for a 1-year delay in the individual mandate, but you've also called for Georgia to accept the Medicaid expansion with the federal government. But can you put your position on this issue in broader terms? Do you think that the Affordable Care Act is going to be around 6 years from now when this term comes up again? And if so, what do you think most urgently needs to be improved about it?
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the Atlanta Press Club, Georgia Public Broadcasting, to my fellow candidates, to those that are watching here live today and virtually. Thanks for your commitment to citizenship. I have said that I look at ACA from the vantage point of someone who ran an organization, who had to make a payroll, who saw rising health care premiums. And I think that we need the two sides to work together to fix what's not working yet and to build upon the things that are. And when I think about the things that need to be fixed, it includes the fact that when I visit Southwest Georgia, they have among the highest premiums in the nation. And we need to add a lower tier, affordable rate for families and individuals. We also need to add a tax credit for small businesses, and I think that we also need to repeal the cuts that are happening to our rural hospitals as a result of our not expanding Medicaid. But we also need to build upon the fact that we now have people that have pre-existing conditions that have the capacity to have health care. They're able to cover their children under age 20. And so we know that there are a lot of good things that we need to build upon.
All right. Gene Bonner, time for you to ask a question of Todd Robinson.
Good evening, Candidate Robinson.
Good evening. How you doing?
Georgia lawmakers earlier this year sponsored a so-called religious freedom bill. It was actually modeled on a bill that President Clinton signed into law. Some critics, however, voiced concern that it would have legalized discrimination, particularly against gays. What is your thought on that type of legislation?
Well, again, also I would like to thank the Georgia Public Broadcasting and the Atlanta Press Club for putting on this debate. And I would like to also tell my fellow candidates Happy Mother's Day.
Thank you.
Back to the question, we have to express equality here in Georgia. Freedom of religion, everybody should be able to worship in their own right, and we have to continue to express equality with all people, all races, and with same-sex marriages. I support a civil union. I hold the sanctity of marriage sacred with my wife and I, and I think we just have to go back to equality and the freedom of religion. Thank you.
Rose, your turn to ask a question of Dr. Radd.
Dr. Radd, you're a physician, and with the expansion of health care under the Affordable Care Act, rural hospitals are losing federal funding. How would you propose that if you are to go to Washington, that you could help restore funding for those hospitals and clinics?
Well, thank you for the question. I also want to send my thanks to Atlanta Press Club and to the Georgia Public Broadcasters for putting on this debate. I also thank the folks who are coming in the audience, and also my fellow candidates, and Happy Mother's Day to all the moms in the room. That's a critical question for us here in Georgia. I think one of the first things I would do as a next United States Senator is to go up to Washington. I would propose and introduce legislation to cover all those states and create funding for all those states that were denied Medicaid expansion to make sure we do have the funds available. I'd also try and delay the cuts in the payments that would be coming, that we would not be receiving. But mainly I would try to create a collaboration between the Veterans Affairs Administration and rural hospitals here in Georgia to invest in those rural communities, create this federal-state collaboration so we provide access to veterans and also provide the care that we need in those communities.
Excellent. That concludes our first round. In the second round tonight, each candidate will ask one question to the opponent of their choice, and each candidate will have 30 seconds to ask the question, 60 seconds to respond, and 30 seconds for a rebuttal. And Michelle Nunn, you get the first question.
Great, thanks. I was going to ask Mr. Robinson, you're
Yes.
a veteran,
Yes.
and we're grateful for your service.
Thank you.
And I wanted to ask your ideas for what we can do to support our veterans here in Georgia and across the country.
Well, Ms. Nunn, I'm glad you asked that. Being a veteran, the only veteran out of the four candidates, we have to support our military veterans coming back from the wars, mental and physical rehabilitation. We have to secure our military bases and civilian workforce. We have young men and women that are putting their lives on the line every single day for this country. We need a force. We need to continue to build up our army and not tear it down. We need to secure our borders. And when our young teenagers go and signed up to go to war, we need to support them. We need to support them in the fight, and we need to support them after the fight with any kind of support we can, and also with funding and the best equipment money can buy. Thank you.
Michelle Nunn, you have 30 seconds to respond if you'd like.
Oh, well, thank you again for your service. I just want to add that I do think that we need to make sure that we heed the commitments that we've made to our military men and women, that we live up to those commitments, that we don't have them wait in line, for instance, for 320 days, which is average here in Atlanta, to process their claims, and that we also ensure that they have the jobs and the education that they need to make a successful transition from military service to civilian life. And finally, I think that we also need a real community embrace. My work at Points of Light, we spend a lot of time working with veterans, helping them with employment and with education. So it's more than just our government, it's all of our citizens.
All right, thank you. Todd Robinson, it's now your turn to ask a question to the candidate of your choice.
Thank you. I'd like to address my question to Ms. Nunn. Ms. Nunn, after viewing your videos or your commercials, I guess I'm curious. There's nothing to indicate that you're a Democrat and you support the policies that Democrats have put in place. And do you support President Obama? And are you a Democrat?
I think it is self-evident, since I am on the stage here to win the Democratic nomination for the Senate, that I am a Democrat. I have spent my life as a Democrat. It's a part of my family heritage. It's part of the values that I embrace that include fairness and equity and opportunity for all, and compassion and empathy as well. And the issues that I care about include those that I think I can advance as a Democratic senator, and that includes the minimum wage, making sure that folks have a livable wage, making sure that we pass comprehensive immigration reform, and pay equity. So I do believe that I am absolutely in pursuit of the Democratic nomination, but at the same time, I want to represent all of Georgia, and I believe that we need bipartisanship. I believe that we need to cross party lines. And one of my ads, I talked about my service as Points of Light CEO under President George H.W. Bush. I believe that even though I am a Democrat, that it is incredibly important that I work across party lines in a bipartisan fashion to find common ground and to get things done for the people of Georgia and for our nation.
Mr. Robinson, you have 30 seconds to respond if you'd like.
Well, I'm still concerned, Ms. Nunn. I spoke of President Obama, and you spoke of George Bush. Can you say President Obama in any of your speeches or any of your commercials? Can you call his name?
Well, you have a chance to ask her one question. I'll let you answer that.
Yes.
But moving forward, the rebuttal is not to ask another question, but please feel free to answer the question.
I'm proud to have worked with President Obama, and I've had a really the great fortune to have worked with all of our presidents, but I am very grateful for my service with President Obama, with Michelle Obama, and I am excited to advance the things that I think are for Georgia, and would work with President Obama to accomplish that. And if we have areas of disagreement, then I would work to make improvements as well.
Thank you. We'll leave that there for the moment. Dr. Rad, your turn.
I've got a question for Ms. Nunn. Your encounters with Georgia voters since declaring your candidacy have been mostly invitation only. And several women who have participated have told me how ill at ease and scripted you've seemed. And some women have shown me several photos that they've taken with their phone of you standing like this. Clearly seeming ill at ease. And she asked, what does this body language say to you? So my question is, what is it that makes you so uncomfortable about being candid and accessible to Georgia voters?
Well, let me start by saying that I started out my campaign in a minivan with my 9 and 11-year-old and my husband. We traveled for 10 days across the state. I answered questions of all variety, and I have been doing that ever since. I've actually been in 200 different events around the state and have answered every question that I've been asked. And I have met the most extraordinary Georgians. I know that you all would agree with me that the Senate and running for this office is an incredible privilege, and you get to meet, I think the very best of Georgia. And I have seen the incredible capacity for people to work together and to get things done and to collaborate, and that's the spirit that I bring to this race, and a wide open embrace to both this debate and our opportunity to have the conversation, and to an opportunity to work with and learn from the Georgia voters.
Dr. Rad, you have 30 seconds to respond.
I think it's critical that we have a candidate who's going to earn the nomination for the Democratic nomination. I think it's so critical that they are out in the public, meeting folks in very open, unscripted formats and venues, and also that they're out in forums and debates with other Democrats and even and other Republicans. And this is the first one that you've been to. And I think it's really, I do think that we need to have a Democratic candidate who really is willing, courageous, willing to step up for what they believe in, and really meet folks, voters and other candidates, in forums and debates to really demonstrate what they stand for.
All right, time's up. Thank you very much. Steen Miles, it's your turn.
Thank you. My question also is for Ms. Nunn. You asked the question of Mr. Robinson regarding our veterans. If you understand the plight of our veterans and what war does, why would you call for a military strike against Syria?
So if we look back in time at the issue of Syria, y'all will remember that the president declared a red line and said that if President Assad used chemical weapons, that America would take action. And at the time, I supported the president in that affirmation. We were able to, with, I think, a strong response from the president, we were able to actually negotiate diplomatic action that has ensured that now 75% of the chemical weapons in Syria have been removed. I think we need to be vigilant in ensuring that the rest of the chemical weapons are removed, and I believe that we cannot let President Assad act with impunity, have chemical weapons in the Middle East in a very dangerous area, and you know, I think we need to ensure that we continue to enforce the negotiated settlement.
You have 30 seconds to respond. Ms.
Sure,
Miles.
and that sounds wonderful. But the fact of the matter is there were 90% of Georgians were opposed to a military strike against Syria. And for you to think that you were going to side with the Republican delegation and call for a military strike against Syria when we had not explored the diplomatic channels was just absolutely egregious when you consider the toll that combat takes on our veterans and our families.
That is now the end of the second round. Thank you very much, candidates. For those of you just joining us, this is the debate between the Democratic candidates in Georgia's U.S. Senate race. We'll now go to our third and final round, and in this round, each panelist will ask a question to the candidate of his or her choice until we run out of time. I will determine when a rebuttal is appropriate, and Jean, you get the first question, again, to the candidate of your choice.
Thanks, Russ. I'd like to ask Ms. Nunn a question. Your fellow Georgia Democrat, Jason Carter, who's running for governor, calls himself an NRA Democrat, and he supports a bill that will allow guns in some churches, bars, and schools. I'm sure you've heard about it. Are you an NRA Democrat, and what do you think about Georgia's new gun law?
I believe in the Second Amendment, and I have grandparents who are hunters and gun owners. I have an 11-year-old who is a hunter, and I believe that we should make sure that we keep guns out of the hands of terrorists and criminals and those who are mentally unstable. So I believe that we should move forward with the Manchin-Toomey legislation, bipartisan legislation that was not able to be passed in Congress. In terms of the state legislative bill, I obviously did not vote on that. I'm not called to vote upon that. I have said that I believe that I have the same concerns that law enforcement officials have shared, which is that they have said that this would make them less safe and it would make it harder for them to protect our citizenry. And I agree with that concern.
Rose, your turn.
This question is also for candidate Nunn. You are in favor of the Keystone XL pipeline, which puts you among a few current Democrats in Washington that are in favor of this project. The current administration is delaying a decision. Are you convinced that the benefits of the project outweigh the environmental concerns? And if so, how are you convinced of that?
Yeah, I have looked at the State Department's 5.5-year exhaustive study, and what it concluded was several things. One was that the environmental impact of the pipeline would be negligible. The second is that it would be important for jobs and economic opportunity, and finally that it would be important to our energy independence for North America. And based upon that, I believe that we should move forward. I believe that the pipeline, we know that the pipeline is safer than rail in terms of the transportation of gas and oil. And we also know that it is better to get our energy from Canada, not Russia, not the Middle East, not Venezuela. So I think all of these factors lead me, along with 11 other Democratic senators, to conclude that we should advance and move forward with the pipeline. Tom
Baxter.
Dr. Redd, as a psychiatrist running for a seat in a body which has been widely diagnosed as dysfunctional, what's your strategy for making Congress a more civil and productive institution?
Well, I appreciate the question. I think as a psychiatrist in practice, I treat folks of all political stripes, of Tea Partiers and libertarians and conservatives and Democrats and progressives and liberals. And it really doesn't make any difference to me when they walk through that door, all those labels fall away. And what we're able to do is focus on the problem. And when we focus on the problem, the solutions become very apparent. And I plan to bring that kind of training and that sort of focus to the work in Washington. I think we can work together. We can work in a bipartisan way, as was demonstrated by the bipartisan immigration reform legislation passed last year out of the Senate. And I also believe that I've been doing that as a candidate. I've been going out around the state, meeting with different groups, debating the Republicans, going up to Tea Party U.S. Senate candidate forums and talking to them about democratic values like increasing the minimum wage and what does it mean to have a living wage. Many folks in the Tea Party don't understand that concept of a living wage, but we had a conversation about it, and it was really very productive, and it was civil, and I plan to bring that kind of approach to Washington.
Jean, your turn to ask another question.
Thank you. And this is a question for Ms. Miles. With the construction of Plant Vogtle, Georgia has the distinction of being the only state building a new nuclear power plant in 30 years. There have already been some cost overruns and other concerns. Other states are not following our lead. Is Plant Vogtle a mistake?
I would have to say yes, particularly when it comes to nuclear energy. We must stop relying on nuclear energy and fossil fuels. We must invest and do the research and development for renewable energies of water and wind and solar. It is a shame in the state of Georgia that we were the only eastern seaboard state that did not make application for offshore wind turbines. Just 2 weeks ago, $40 million went to Clemson University for doing the research. That money could have come to Georgia. And so I do think that relying on nuclear energy is a mistake. Relying on fossil fuels is a mistake. We absolutely must do as the president is already trying to outline, and that is invest in renewable energies. That is the wave of the future. That's going to create jobs. That's what we need to do.
Rose Scott, your turn.
Dr. Rad, you are not in favor of the Keystone Project. Are you convinced that the environmental concerns outweigh the job benefits?
Well, let me just say, I'm not in favor of Keystone Pipeline construction. I don't believe that the economic benefits outweigh the environmental benefits. And let's look at the bigger picture. We really need a clear energy policy moving away from carbon and moving away from nuclear. I believe that the Keystone is in contradiction to that. I believe it's only going to enforce the energy status quo. It's not going to create energy independence for America. That oil is going to be shipped out to China. It's going to be shipped out to Europe. It's not going to bring prices down here in the United States. In fact, TransCanada, the builder of this pipeline, has studies that show that in the Midwest, gas prices are actually going to increase. I think it's wrong for environmental reasons and it's wrong for economic reasons. We need to move in the direction of solar, wind, renewable energy sources. That's the future. That's the vision that I have.
Mr. Robinson, I'm going to ask you a question,
Sure.
if that's all
Thank
right.
you.
I'm curious why you're running for U.S. Senate. It's an uphill climb, not a particularly well-funded campaign, as I'm sure you would acknowledge. Why are you running, and why would you be better than the other three candidates?
Well, thank you for asking that, Spencer. Being the only veteran out of the candidates and the only educator out of the candidates, we need to empower, we need to educate, and we need to equip our kids for tomorrow's future. With our military, we cannot say enough about our veterans. We have veterans that are coming back from wars that we have to rehabilitate. We have to get them into a workforce, program to get them back into the civilian life. I feel that I'm the better candidate. I feel that I have the new face, I have the new perspectives, and I have the new ideas that can go to Washington, work with Senator Isaacson across the aisles as a Republican, and we share the burden, or share the duties of senator in the state of Georgia. It's not going to be about a Republican. It's not going to be about a Democrat. We're going to work together to make Georgia better. Thank you.
All right, sir. Thank you. Tom Baxter.
Ms. Miles, let's come back around to the Keystone Pipeline for a minute. Everybody wants to have compromise in Washington, or they say they do. And recently, one of the potential compromises that's been talked about a lot is the idea of Democrats going along with the Keystone Pipeline in exchange for Republicans allowing an increase in the minimum wage. Despite what you feel about the Keystone Pipeline, would you be agreeable to a compromise like that, or do you think that's off limits?
I think that is absolutely off limits. That is not a compromise. We absolutely do not need to do the Keystone Pipeline. There is no empirical evidence, despite what Ms. Nunn says, that it's going to benefit us economically. There is no evidence that it is going to drive the price of fuel down. The only evidence that is sustainable, and that is the fact that it is going to do irreparable harm to our environment, not to mention to wildlife, and the possibility of catastrophic spills. And so, no, that is not a compromise. What we need to do in Washington is to return to a moral vision where we are putting people above politics, and to say that we will raise the minimum wage in exchange for the pipeline is absolutely untenable.
Ms. Nunn, she mentioned your name. You have 30 seconds for rebuttal if you'd like it.
Sure. President Obama's State Department is the one that made those conclusions, not me. So it was a 5.5-year study, and I think those facts from their conclusions speak for themselves. But I do think we agree that we should put people before politics, and I do believe that we should get the minimum wage passed with or without a compromise on the Keystone.
Jean Bonner, your turn to ask a question.
Okay, I'd like to ask Ms. Nunn another question. You have said that you want to represent all of Georgia. What support in the Tea Party do you have, and what do you think that they've accomplished here in Georgia?
As someone who spent 25 years engaging citizens and volunteers and mobilizing people to just be involved in their communities, I have a tremendous respect for all organizations that get people involved, that get them engaged in the process. One of the things that I'm proud and excited about is that not only have I been talking to Republicans, but I've been earning some of their support. I have over 75 business leaders that have joined a business council, an advisory council that's helping shape my policies and giving me their thoughts and advice. So I believe that I am going to be able to appeal to independents and to Republicans and those that are looking for sensible and reasonable leadership as compared to, for instance, the Republican primary contenders in this race who are in a race to the extremes. When I look at Congressman Kingston, for instance, who said that he was proud to have gotten support in the bill for the Savannah Harbor, but then voted against it in the end. Or David Perdue, who said he was against and thinks that Obamacare is the ruination of the nation, but was a few years ago for a federal health care solution.
All right. Michelle Nunn, thank you. Rose?
Kenneth Miles, you're aware of failed state legislation such as the T-Splosh here in Georgia. If you were to go to Washington, how can you assure Georgians that you're going to make sure funding comes back to the state to take care of some of those many projects that seemingly are just sort of in a wait and hold pattern right now?
Thank you for that question. Transportation and economic development are hand in glove. And I will work in Washington to bring real transportation dollars to the state of Georgia. I was against the T-Splosh because it didn't do enough for another penny, particularly in areas that had already paid a penny and weren't getting much return on the investment. We absolutely need transit and transportation in the state of Georgia, and that is one of the areas that I would like to serve on the Committee of Transportation in order to bring those dollars here to Georgia. It's so critical that we have good transportation crisscrossing this state, north, south, east, and west. Particularly, we're going to get the money for dredging the port at Savannah. That is important for transportation dollars to be there to help move those projects forward. Also, for the Port of Brunswick, it is important that we have transportation, good transportation, to move goods and services and people from point A to point B. I will work for transportation.
Tom Baxter?
Mr. Robinson.
Yes, sir.
One of the things that Georgia senators and members of Congress have traditionally been judged by is their ability to protect our military bases here in Georgia and to keep them from being moved. And those bases are even more vital to the economy in parts of the state now than they were in decades past. But it's getting more difficult to, with more and more cutbacks, to hang on to those bases. What strategies should the state follow to hold on to the bases, and what could you add to that?
Well, thank you for asking that question. Being a military veteran and being from Columbus, Georgia, the Fort Benning area, we have to realize that the economic impact that all the bases provide for the cities that's neighboring those bases. You talk about down at Moody Air Force Base, $480 million that they attribute to Valdosta. You're talking about $47 billion that Fort Benning attributes to Columbus. I will work on the base closure, the realignment coalition as the next United States Senator from Georgia on the Armed Forces Committee to fight for those bases and do careful studies to ensure that the bases are reliable and they are providing a good for those areas. But we have to look at safeguarding those bases now and the amount of soldiers that we train and the civilian workforce that we employ. We have to keep those bases open, and I will fight to keep BRAC out of Georgia, be it an Air Force base or military base or Army base.
Mr. Robinson, thank you very much. Michelle Nunn, I'd like to ask you a question. Georgia, for the last 12 years, has been a reliably red state, and I do think it's fair to suggest that your commercials at least imply a conservative point of view, talking about the Points of Light Foundation that George H.W. Bush started many, many years ago, talking about the importance of independence when you discuss your grandmother. What are you going to do to try to win this if you get the nomination this time? And is there an area where you seriously disagree with President Obama? Talk to us about that.
Well, I do believe that we need to send people to Washington that can work across the aisle and get things done. I think I have a record and history of doing that. I think we need people who are willing to find common ground. As I said, I have a tremendous respect for President Obama. There are places where I differ with President Obama. I wish that he had put in his budget the Savannah Harbor funds for deepening of the Savannah Harbor. I wish that he had worked to actually advance the tackling of our long-term debt. And those are just a couple of examples, including also, I think working with the business community and having more folks from the business community that have been engaged with his administration. But I think when Georgia voters look at this race, what they are going to ultimately decide is who can best represent their interests, who is going to bring a focus on actually getting things done, solving problems, and putting partisanship aside, but looking for common ground, bringing civility and a collaborative spirit.
Thank you. Rose Scott.
My question is for Dr. Rad. Right now, states are dealing with how the lethal injection drug used for execution is being bought, and even in some states are dealing with the secrecy of that. Is it time now for Washington to maybe take a look at how executions are carried out in the states, particularly with the whole issues of lethal injection and what just happened in Oklahoma with the botched lethal injection?
Oh, absolutely. I think we ought to have that discussion nationally at the federal level, also at the state level, at the local level. I mean, this is a critical issue. I think there's a reason why these manufacturers are bailing out of producing these kinds of chemicals and these kinds of drugs. And I think it just speaks to the fact that the death penalty, from my perspective, is really ineffective. It's ineffective at reducing crime. And we also know for a fact that we have executed innocent people. And I think that's absolutely morally wrong. And it's legally wrong. And I feel very strongly about this. I'll be a very passionate advocate in Washington to bring this conversation to the federal level and bring about some honest change to this process. And I do not support capital punishment, and I would look for other remedies.
Jean Bonner, your turn to ask a question.
Thank you, Ms. I'd like to ask another question of Ms. Nunn. Many people in Georgia and beyond would say few people on Wall Street were punished for the financial crisis. What is your thought on that?
I do believe that we need to hold accountable those that were responsible and directly contributed to the financial crisis. I believe that there has been important legislation that's been passed to address, but we need to continue to have transparency and accountability. We need to also ensure that we don't have too big to fail, and I do believe that that we should hold greatly accountable those that have had any responsibility for this.
Tom Baxter.
Dr. Redd, the concept of net neutrality took a hit recently with a ruling by the Federal Communications Commission, which has been viewed as weakening the rule which requires Internet providers to give equal access to all content providers. What's your position on this issue, and what role should Congress play in resolving it?
Well, I absolutely disagree with that FCC ruling. I think the taxpayers, American taxpayers, help pay for the development of the internet. And so it's our investment. It really belongs to all the people. It's a public good in a way. And I don't believe in such a thing as pay to play with the internet. I don't think we should let the corporate interests outweigh the interests of the public. So I'll be a very strong supporter of net neutrality and do everything I can to make sure that the people's investment, it continues to provide returns for them.
Do you think Congress has a role in that?
I do. I absolutely think we do. Yes.
Rose?
My question is for Ms. Nunn. When you hear about the deaths of these servicemen who were waiting for care under the Veterans Department, is it time, though, for Eric Shinseki? Should he resign? Should we hold him accountable for those deaths of those service personnel?
Well, I think all of us are outraged at the deaths of our veterans, and I think we owe it to them to make sure that we understand exactly what happened and that we remedy the situation and never let it happen again. We need accountability. We need to make sure there's congressional oversight of this issue. I defer to the President's judgment about the leadership that will be necessary to ensure that accountability and that transparency, and that we actually change the system in order to preclude this from ever happening again.
Jean?
Thanks, Russ. Dr. Radd, I'd like to ask you a question, following up on a question Tom had asked earlier. You're a doctor. What's the prognosis for the Affordable Health Care Act?
Well, as a medical doctor, I believe that health care is a right and not a privilege for the few. I have been a staunch supporter of the Affordable Care from the get-go. I've even created a DVD. You can go to my website, drradforsenate.com. It calls out Insurance Commissioner Hudgens and Governor Deal for their obstructionism on the implementation of the ACA. I think, listen, we've had now over 8 million people have signed up to the marketplace exchanges, even several million more through the Medicaid expansion. It's the law. It's here to stay. Let's make it better. Let's work together to decrease costs. Let's find ways to get even more people insured and covered under this program. I believe it's a step in the right direction. It's benefiting people. I myself and my family, we signed up to the Marketplace Exchange earlier this year, and our premiums went down by 28%, and our deductible was reduced by 50%. I believe it can benefit the majority of Americans. We need to find ways to make it work for everybody, and I'll do that.
Tom Baxter?
Ms. Nunn, as a member of the Senate Agriculture Committee and a South Georgia resident, Senator Chambliss has been heavily involved in agricultural issues, from immigration to the peanut program. I may be wrong, but I'm looking at this panel, and it doesn't look to me like it has maybe the most rural experience. But would you consider those issues to be an important part of your responsibility as a senator, and how are you qualified to address them?
I do believe agriculture is critical to our economy, to our state heritage. I am a third-generation farm owner from Perry, Georgia. We have grown and continue to grow everything from pecans to peppers. And we have a pig named Maybelline and chickens. And so I've had the incredible opportunity to see firsthand the importance of our agricultural community and diversity of our crops. I believe that we have an agricultural bill now that took 2 years to get done, but was accomplished through bipartisanship finally, that's going to advance our agricultural sector, and everything from innovation and public-private partnerships to specialty crops to ensuring that we cultivate the next generation of farmers. And it also continues to provide nutritional assistance that's incredibly important. And I think we need to build upon that. I think we need to bring more manufacturing integrated into our agricultural ecosystem. And I also think that we need to continue to diversify our crops and build and help our farmers in the great work that they do that's so important for our state and for our economy.
Steen Miles, I'd like to ask you a question about what it's like to run a shoestring campaign and your opinion of our democratic process when it seems like you need either a lot of money or a lot of name recognition just to really register with the voters.
Sure. I think campaign reform is necessary. I hearken back to the words of the president, however, in his State of the Union address, and he said these words, that it is the power of the vote and not the size of the pocketbook that drives our democracy. And I fervently believe that. It is an uphill battle when you don't have the necessary funding. But on pennies, we've been able to crisscross this entire state and engage with the voters, talking to Georgians, listening to Georgians, hearing their concerns and what keeps Georgians awake at night. And we're very excited and very pleased about the progress that we've been able to make. I do want to say, however, that it is absolutely disheartening when individuals with money do not engage voters, do not take the time to talk to the rank and file, and only to specific groups, elite groups of people. That is challenging.
Are you referring to Ms. Nunn?
I am referring to Ms. Nunn, yes. We have had a number of forums around this state where Dr. Rad and Todd and myself have participated, and Ms. Nunn has been conspicuously absent.
Well, let's give her a chance.
I think that bucket of money gives you a certain arrogance that perhaps you don't need to engage the voters, that all you need to do is do commercials.
Let's give her a chance to respond to that.
Am I done?
I think you've made the
Okay.
point, yes. Let's give her a chance to respond.
So we agree about campaign finance reform. I think that we absolutely need campaign finance reform. The only way we're going to accomplish it is legislatively, and we need to overturn Citizens United. We need a Disclose Act, but none of us can unilaterally disarm, and we all need to do our best to engage our citizenry in supporting, with the broadest base possible, our candidacy. And I feel fortunate that I have 25,000 people that have made a contribution to our campaign. 75% of those people have given less than $100. So what I have is a grassroots movement, and that's what my campaign is about.
All right, Ms. Nunn, thank you. Rose?
My question is for candidate Robinson. You said you support civil unions.
Yes.
Are you in support of a state like Georgia changing that amendment that recognizes a marriage only between a man and a woman?
Yes, I do. I stand on that. A marriage should be between a man and a woman. And on my Christian faith, I feel that all rights and all privileges should be given to same-sex couples, and I think they should be considered and labeled as civil unions. And that's not to degrade anybody, the love for one partner or another. I think people choose who they want to love, and the government or society shouldn't have anything to do with that. That's their business. But I think when it comes to marriage, I think we should sanctify the marriage between a man and a woman, and it should be considered a civil union. Thank you.
Jean, you get the last question.
Oh, okay, great. Question from Ms. Nunn. There certainly have been a lot of what I think one might call ad hominem attacks tonight, other places against you. Do you think it's because you're just the front runner? Is it because you don't have a voting record? What do you make of the fact that clearly a lot of people have some tough questions for you?
I'm very popular tonight. So I feel like we have tremendous momentum with our campaign. As I said, I think unrivaled by either the Democratic slate of candidates or the Republican, we have a huge grassroots army that is including donors and volunteers that are working every single day. And I think what captures their interest and imagination is that I am someone who has built a record of public service, who's grown an organization from a couple $1,000s to a $30 million organization, and who has the experience and talks about working across party lines and collaborating and getting things done. And that's my message, and that's, I think that's what's resonating.
Michelle Nunn, thank you very much, and thank you to all four candidates. So that's all the time we have for questions now. Each candidate will now have 60 seconds for a closing statement. The candidates were chosen by random selection, and Dr. Rad, you get the first closing statement.
Okay. Well, I'm called to address this crisis in leadership up in Washington. I believe that the only way we're going to do that is with a new face, with an unusual suspect. I believe that the political class is at the root of the dysfunction up in Washington, and I think that if we bring anyone up to Washington who is part of that class, either as a candidate, a former candidate, or who has strong ties to the Washington establishment, I just think that's going to bring about the status quo. It's not going to bring about the change that we in Georgia need and that our nation needs in moving forward. So from my perspective, I have the background in business and finance. I've worked on Wall Street and investment banking. I've also worked as a solo practitioner and a small business owner. So I have those experiences as well. and I've also been a mental health advocate. So I've got the heart of someone with courage, with passion, with clarity of purpose, who is working and looking to serve the people here in Georgia. And I've heard Ms. Nunn's got several point plan to fix what's wrong in Washington, and the Republicans have several points to fix what's wrong in Washington. Well, I'll tell you, I've got a 1-point plan to fix in Washington, and that goes something like this. Georgia needs a new senator, but Washington really needs a psychiatrist. So I'm ready on both counts. Do the job. Vote for Dr. Rad May 20th or sooner. Thank you.
Time's up, Dr. Hrabowski. Thank you very much. Mr. Robinson, your turn.
Well, the gentleman alluded to earlier that neither one of us looked like we knew anything about the agriculture of Georgia. I'm a country boy. I'm from Thomasville, Georgia. I'm born and raised in Thomasville, Georgia. I used to work on my grandfather's farm. I used to pick cotton, used to pick tobacco, I used to pick beans. So I know the importance of hard work. My mom and dad worked hard, and my grandfather raised 12 children on a farm, and I know the importance of agriculture. You got to get the boots on the ground. You got to go out in those fields. You got to go out in those cotton fields, those peanut fields, those soybean fields, those chicken factories, whatever, and you got to get dirty. I don't have a problem getting dirty. I'm retired military. I've served in every leadership position in the military, in the leadership position. I've jumped out of everything in the Army's inventory, including windows, as an airborne ranger. So I know it's going to take decisive leadership in Washington, working across the aisle. I am the new face. I have the new perspectives, and I have the new ideas. Send Todd Robinson as the next United States Senator to Georgia.
All right, Todd Robinson, thank you very much. Michelle Nunn, your turn for a closing statement.
I've noticed we all want to be the new fresh face for Georgia, but I have spent the last 25 years meeting and participating with the most extraordinary volunteers, and I've seen the very best of America. And over the course of the last 10 months, as I've traveled around the state, I feel like I've seen the very best of Georgia as well. And I've met wonderful people. One of my favorite was a woman named Christy, who fulfilled a lifelong dream by going back to school and getting her degree from technical school at 55. She was the top of her class. But she couldn't find a job for 2 years. When I was in Rome, she came bounding up to me and said that she actually now has a job working with seniors, and she can't wipe the smile off of her face every single day. So we have an incredible resiliency and incredible idealism here in Georgia, and I want to build upon that. I want to be the voice for Christy. I want to help ensure that every Georgian has the opportunity to fulfill their great gifts. And so I'm asking for the vote of Georgians, and I hope that we can restore the Georgia State motto values: wisdom and justice and moderation.
Thank you. Steen Miles, your turn.
My fellow Georgians, I have been engaged in my community for all of my adult life, serving in PTA, Chamber of Commerce, leadership, the League of Women Voters, NAACP, you name it, I've been engaged. And I'm also the only Democrat running who has legislative policy-making experience. We talk about our experience of passing out awards and listening to people and having buckets of money. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's just not good enough when it comes to our need to fully restore the Voting Rights Act, when it comes to our need to make certain that we have pay parity and that we have a minimum wage, that people do not have to rely on the public dole, and that we educate our children, and that we also protect the environment. Ladies and gentlemen, we can ill afford to send a political neophyte to Washington at this critical juncture. My name is Steen Miles. I am asking you for your support as the next U.S. Senator from the great state of Georgia. God bless you. God bless the great state of Georgia and these United States of America.
Thank you, Steen Miles. And that concludes our debate. We'd like to remind voters that the primary elections will be held on Tuesday, May 20th, and early voting, in fact, is already underway. Please stay with us for a political roundtable discussion of tonight's debate. That's up next on GPB's On the Story. Our thanks tonight to the candidates and to our panel of journalists. We'd also like to thank the Atlanta Press Club for arranging tonight's debate. For more information about the Atlanta Press Club and all of the debates that it will hold this primary season, you may visit atlantapressclub.org. This debate will be archived there as well. The debate will also be available on demand on gpb.org. The Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series is made possible by a donation from R. Charles Loudermilk. I'm Russ Spencer. Thanks for joining us for the Atlanta Press Club Loudermilk Young Debate Series. Have a good night, and make sure to vote.